Hi, everybody. So we have Dr. Dom D'Agostino with us today. He has a Ph.D. in neuroscience and physiology, and he is a professor at the University of South Florida College of Medicine. So welcome, Dom.
Great to be here, David. Thank you.
And I know you just recently did the Joe Rogan podcast, so that makes me feel a little better with myself. I've got a Joe Rogan guest on my show here. So,
Cool.
and you mentioned you wanted to have my donation go to the Charlie Foundation. So can you just explain why you chose that one?
Yeah, the Charlie Foundation was the first thing that came up on a Google search 10 years ago. So the ketogenic diet wasn't very big 10 years ago, but I was studying seizures, and I was studying it in the context of understanding oxygen toxicity seizures that limit Navy SEAL or Special Operations Forces as it pertains to diving. And the story of Charlie Abrams really inspired me, and his dad, Jim Abrams, a Hollywood producer, made a movie with Meryl Streep called First Do No Harm. And I think it's free on YouTube. You can look it up. And watching that movie and hearing the stories about how the ketogenic diet can be used to manage epilepsy, and really in some cases cure epilepsy, which was the case for Charlie Abrams, really inspired me. And they do more work serving the ketogenic diet community from a clinical standpoint than any other foundation I know of.
Awesome. And, obviously a lot of people know you as the keto expert now, but you mentioned like your background is neuroscience originally. So when you began that search, what caused you to even look into ketosis as a medical agent?
Yeah, I did my undergrad in nutrition science and biology. And then the 90s was kind of the decade of the brain. So I was really passionate about nutrition, but I couldn't really see like the job frontiers in nutrition. It didn't offer like a whole lot of opportunity. So I majored in neuroscience, and I took a track in my postdoctoral fellowship to study seizures. And I was mostly looking at anti-seizure drugs and what drugs could be used for the types of applications that I was, looking at it from a military perspective. And the types of seizures that I was studying were resistant to drug therapy. And I saw that, I asked the question, what do people do who have drug-resistant epilepsy? And I stumbled upon the ketogenic diet, and I knew of it from bodybuilding, in fitness community, but I actually didn't know what it was. I thought it was just like a low carb, high protein, low carb diet, but it's actually, high fat, moderate to low protein, and very restricted in carbohydrates. And I thought it was a fad diet, but I realized, from PubMed research and this was a legitimate medical therapy that was actually the standard of care for seizure disorders, and now a growing number of applications actually. So as a postdoctoral fellow who just finished their PhD, they need to basically develop their own independent research program. And I saw the vision of basically developing a ketogenic strategy for the Navy SEAL warfighter and for a special operations community. And I kind of dug in deep, and I faced some resistance from different fronts, but it all worked out very well as far as, getting the funding required to do the type of research that I needed to do for the Department of Defense and the Navy. And it led off into other projects like looking at cancer, looking at inflammation, looking at a variety of rare diseases, including Angelman syndrome, metabolic diseases, genetic diseases like Kabuki syndrome we're studying now. It's led me down paths that I could have never, ever thought of in a million years. Like we're looking at ketones as an epigenetic therapy by virtue of their ability to actually turn on and turn off different gene pathways. So I just understood ketones as a metabolic fuel that your brain can use, but now, they have all these signaling properties, and I never would have guessed it would have gotten as big as it did. And I think, the right people kind of talked about it, and it went down some channels, and the diet does work in the context of body composition changes too. So I think that's very attractive to a large majority of people out there. It's very effective for weight loss and things like that.
Sure. Yeah, and it is very interesting. Like you, in college, I studied exercise science and nutrition, and I just didn't really know of how to use that as a career. As far as I mean, you could be like a trainer or things like that, but I didn't see
Yeah.
too many options for that. And then now it's huge, and you've got
Yeah.
tons of people doing coaching, and the research in that area has really blown up. So it's cool to see that. Now, like you, I first heard about the ketogenic diet from a bodybuilding standpoint. And I think you've gone on to say before that you don't even believe that it's optimal for muscle growth, if I remember correctly. So how would you modify, for somebody who is doing a ketogenic diet but still wants to gain some muscle, how would you modify it for optimal muscle growth? Or do you think for optimality, you would just scratch a ketogenic entirely?
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely grow muscle and get size and strength on a ketogenic diet, but I do think adding some carbohydrates in creates, another fuel that drives insulin, which is an anabolic, hormone and things like that. But you could simply do a modified ketogenic diet, and instead of 15 or 20% protein, you could boost it up to 30 or 35%. I think no more than 30 or 35, I think, is needed. But if you're doing, a clinical ketogenic diet with 10 to 15% protein, it's hard to grow muscle on that. But if you're doing more 25 to 35% protein, that's the kind of diet I think that a lot of people would be responsive to. If you're a young kid playing football and things like that, a ketogenic diet might be hard. You're very insulin sensitive at that age, typically, especially if you're lean. So I think the utility of the ketogenic diet from a fitness standpoint is for weight loss. We go through cycles, everybody, whether you're playing a sport, getting, in shape for the beach or summer or whatever, or just want to lose a few pounds. I do think that the ketogenic diet offers a lot of advantages, not necessarily ketogenic, but just low carb too, for, suppressing your appetite, preserving lean body mass as you're losing fat, because the ketone bodies are anti-catabolic, they're protein sparing, and they also have anti-inflammatory properties that I think could aid in recovery, could aid in general health too. So I do think the ketogenic diet really shines in the context of a calorie deficit. So when your calories are, at a deficit and you're trying to lose weight, which at any given point, most people are. So I think it's worth a try for people to experiment with this approach.
So it's interesting. It seems like the biggest modification you made there was higher protein, but not really adding in that much with carbs. You still think like the biggest change would be at increasing protein?
I think so too. I think that it depends on what your goals are, really. So I don't want to kind of give any particular prescription, but if to stay in ketosis necessitates that you really keep your carbohydrates restricted and that they are primarily non-glycemic as much as possible, fibrous carbohydrates, vegetables, no starch, very little starch, and very little sugar. I might get maybe a half a cup of blueberries a day, and that would be like, my carbohydrate load for the day. I could still stay in keto. If I have that in the evening with a snack or something like that, by noon the next day, I'm usually like in ketosis. And I feel like I'm getting like a lot of the benefits of ketosis without necessarily being very strict, definitely not as strict as someone using it for medical, like for seizure disorders or something like that. And the foods that I eat, I really enjoy. So I indulge in foods that I otherwise avoided. Like for many years, I don't know, maybe you too, threw out all the egg yolks, or you just keep one or two in, or now I use butter. Now I, full fat, cheeses and fatty cuts of meat and things like that are part of what I eat now. And otherwise, for many years, I avoided that. I ate as low fat as possible, actually.
Yeah, for a while I was actually just doing pure egg yolk omelets.
I do that too. Yeah,
because the protein was too high. And you're going on what, like 10 to 12 years of keto now?
Yeah, over 10.
Wow.
Over
And
10, yeah.
are you still noticing, like, at what point did you stop noticing changes? I know some people say they think it could take years for full adaptations to really occur.
Yeah, It's kind of hard to say because I started with a classical ketogenic diet because I wanted to understand what patients were following. And then in 2008, Eric Kossoff from Johns Hopkins published a couple papers on the modified ketogenic diet for adults, which instead of like 50% protein, it was like 30%. And at that point, I was pretty keto adapted. I was eating almost a classical ketogenic diet, doing a lot of blood work to really understand the diet from the patient perspective and how we could change the diet to make it better. And as soon as I started adding protein back in, I think around that same time, my strength started getting back to where it was when I started the diet. And I think my body just thrives off of a little bit higher protein level. Um, so I think in the beginning, I definitely lost some strength and size. And, the way it kind of works is that when I started this, I got into a tenure track position, and then my time to be in the gym and to work out was a little bit less. But interestingly, I probably cut my actual time in the gym by half, but I was able to maintain the strength on a lot of the major lifts. I think even a couple years into it, I know even training with Lane Norton, at the time we were deadlifting, I remember doing 3 times my body weight on deadlifts, like for reps, like for 4 or 5 or something like that. And I had not done that before. I could never do 3 times my body weight, maybe for a single, but to be able to do reps with that. Yeah. So my my body to weight, strength to weight ratio definitely increased in that regard. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting for me, I guess. So I've never been someone who I felt reacted like great to carbs. Like I would get sleepy. And actually, so like I said, I think maybe I said it before we started recording, was the first time I did a ketogenic diet was in high school. So I was 16 or 17. And I put on a lot of size and strength. Now I was obviously in a surplus. And I did put on a lot of fat. I mean, I was pretty much just doing a full on bulk. But when I hear people say like you can't gain muscle, it's just like crazy to me. Like maybe it's not optimal, but you can certainly gain muscle. And I've done it several times since then. And I've never actually had, and again, maybe I just adapted well to it, but I have better energy, but I've never had this like huge crash in strength or anything. Now I've never done like you where I go like 90, 10 or anything like that. I usually do a modified. But I honestly have never noticed a decrease in strength or size personally.
Yeah, it's the variable there is protein, right? So if you just titrate your protein in to meet your protein needs, protein has an insulin effect too, a small insulin effect. So you're really, I think, adding in the protein will prime your body for growth, especially if you're a younger guy. Actually, I think if you're older too, I think there's distinct advantages to a ketogenic diet as we're older. Our carbohydrate tolerance goes down as we age. Maybe Lane would argue about that, but I really do think that our ability to tolerate carbohydrates as we age goes down. And I think that's people generally are more responsive in a positive way to the ketogenic diet, a low carb diet, as we get older. So I noticed that. I'm in my mid 40s now, and I noticed, I think my body just thrives better on this diet than it would in previous diets that I was following 20 years ago,
And when I started it, actually just recently, it was probably the worst adaptation I had. I think because in the past I had always put carbs in. I was doing like a cyclical ketogenic diet. And this time I just did full on keto with no carb ups or anything like that. I noticed a pretty significant increase in resting heart rate. I was normally around 40 or 50, and I was going up to about 70. And I would wake up in the middle of the night with like near 100 beats per minute. I actually ended up going to urgent care just to get an EKG because I didn't know what was going on. And I tried increasing sodium like crazy, a bunch of different things. And I never really found a solution. I think my body eventually just adapted because now I feel totally normal. Is that something you see a lot? And other than trying to increase electrolytes, is there anything people can do for that?
Yeah, hydration, electrolytes, magnesium, sodium, a lot of funky things go on with electrolytes when you start. One way to do it is just to ease into it and, get your body adapted. If you're doing 200-300 grams of carbs a day, just try 100 grams. And if you're starting this, and then follow that for some periods of time. And when you start the ketogenic diet, your insulin, and I measured insulin, went down a lot. Like it was about a third of what it was, on what I was doing a normal diet. standard diet, and the suppression of the hormone insulin really causes your body to dump a lot of sodium. So I do think adding that back in, especially to things like salads where you're getting a lot of other micronutrients, potassium and things like that, magnesium, I think that helps a lot. And just really staying hydrated, adequately hydrated. Some people get orthostatic hypotension, when they start it, and their blood pressure goes down, which is generally a good thing, but not so much if you have normal blood pressure. If you have high blood pressure, it could be a bad thing. I always ran a little bit high systolic pressure too. And when I started the ketogenic diet, it went from like 135 to like 115 and pretty much stayed down there. So.
Gotcha. Nice. And I also measured my ketones a lot and glucose levels. I only did insulin like before and then after like 6 weeks or so, and it did go down. My HbA1c was from like 5.1 down to 4.6, I think. And then glucose actually was always around like in the 80s. It never got like super low. But one thing I noticed with the ketone levels is when I started it, I wanted to do 2 different phases. And so the first phase had like all the traditional keto foods, so high saturated fat, meats, and things like that. And we'll talk about it a little bit later, but my cholesterol went like crazy high. But something else was that the ketones were probably between 2 to 3 pretty quickly. Like I got into ketosis, I mean, even within a week, I was seeing like 2 to 3. And then my second experiment was taking all that out and just doing almost entirely, healthy fats like monounsaturated fats, olive oil, avocado oil. And I found that my ketone levels were closer to like 0.5 to 1. They just wouldn't go up. Is that common? Do you see that for anybody trying to, maybe do like a less saturated fat diet?
Yeah, it could be that your body's, utilizing the ketones more efficiently now. So we tend to upregulate transporters over time, literally, and you get more across membranes, and your ketolytic enzymes also increase. So you're oxidizing more of them for fuel over time. So that could be part of it. But yeah, I do see changes. Sometimes it goes in one direction, sometimes it goes in the other direction. And it's hard to tell unless you do a lot of blood work and even tissue analysis. We are looking at the ketone transporters, the monocarboxylic acid transporters, before and after people start, the ketogenic diet to gain some insight in that. So we're actually analyzing the data now. So we did it in rats and mice, but now we're doing it in humans too, and seeing if that those upregulation mechanisms, carry over to humans too. We think they do.
Okay, yeah, because I had heard always that saturated fats and especially like MCT oils were more ketogenic, but it sounds like you're saying it might have just been that I got used to it and my body just started utilizing them more, so I was getting lower levels in the reading.
Maybe. So you were adding MCT oil too with when your levels went down?
No, not when I added it. So actually, it wasn't MCT oils originally. It was coconut oil.
Coconut oil, yeah.
But I don't think it's like a huge amount. And then I just went to like almost entirely olive oil and avocado oil, just, again, for experiment's sake. When oil is again later, it helped a little bit, but not as much as when I really just started going back to like the really fatty cuts of meat. Personally, that's what I saw.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I hear that. I hear that often too. Okay. So MCT oil is definitely a way to boost your ketones, and I think incorporating MCTs into things like salad dressings or incorporating the food is definitely a good way to give you a 0.5 to 1 millimolar boost. Not coconut oil, because there's not a whole lot of C8 and C10 in that, but if you just buy, MCT oil online or at the health food store, that's a good thing for people to start out with too. And you may not tolerate it that well, but it's a good way to get your ketones up, and that could help with the transition into ketosis.
Gotcha. And earlier you said about the anti-inflammatory properties of the ketogenic diet. If I recall, you said, I don't remember where I heard this, but you said that the higher levels of ketones act as a histone deacetylase inhibitor, and that can reduce oxidative damage. So when we talk about that, are we saying that just in general inflammation going down throughout, if you're looking at like CRP levels, or how are we measuring that inflammation going down?
Well, we worked with a group at Yale and gave them a ketone ester to elevate ketones independent of the ketogenic diet. So it was just kind of supplemental ketones. And they looked at a particular pathway called the NLRP3 inflammasome.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of like an inflammatory hub that when it's activated, it stimulates the production of a number of really powerful cytokines, IL-1 beta, for example. I mean, things that really cause systemic inflammation. So the way that the study that they conducted determined that beta hydroxybutyrate kept that inflammasome suppressed by preventing the actual sort of assembly of this inflammasome complex and also the activation. So through two different mechanisms, and that particular inflammasome pathway is chronically elevated and activated with autoimmune disorders. So people who have chronic autoimmune disorders, also age-related chronic inflammation is tightly associated with the persistent activation of this inflammasome pathway. So by virtue of elevating beta hydroxybutyrate, one of the primary ketone bodies, that plays an important signaling role by keeping that inflammasome suppressed, even in the presence of things that would otherwise activate it, like lipopolysaccharide, LPS, and things like that. So they evoked various pathways that would activate it, and it could prevent the activation of that inflammatory pathway. So more research needs to be done, but that was a very compelling study. It was published in Nature Medicine, one of the top tier journals, and it kind of pans out that some of the stuff that I saw myself measuring HSC reactive protein and a lot of the blood work that I've seen with cytokines, we're doing a lot of mouse studies, doing very comprehensive cytokine profiles, would suggest that it has a mild to moderate suppression of inflammation if you get your ketone levels up to about 1 millimolar, 1 to 2, and that's really not that high, but that's within a physiological range, and it could probably help a lot of people with chronic inflammation, I think.
Yeah, and when you look into autoimmune diseases, I mean, one of the common threads is chronic inflammation.
Yeah.
And, one of the main drugs that they give are TNF alpha inhibitors,
Yep.
and from what I've seen, ketogenic diets can decrease levels of TNF alpha. So I guess that's one of the mechanisms there. Have you specifically seen a lot of research directly on ketogenic diets in autoimmune diseases like inflammatory bowel disease?
No, but there should be. No studies that I know have really been funded. I do get quite a lot of emails about people telling me their story, but it's really hard to determine whether it was the ketones, the ketogenic diet. A lot of times they follow the diet and they're like, well, I lost 10 pounds and my autoimmune, so it could be a result of calorie deficit, which has anti-inflammatory effects. But I think it's a combination of both. I think following a ketogenic diet is kind of like an elimination diet. So you may be avoiding some of the foods that would otherwise evoke, some of these inflammatory responses, and also the mild calorie deficit that you get on top of an elevation of ketone bodies, which are pretty well established. They have anti-inflammatory effects. So I think you get like multiple kind of multifactorial things synergizing together to produce this anti-inflammatory state. I know I had a skin disorder, eczema, that was pretty bad, and it was on and off for many years. And since I've been doing this diet, like I haven't had one episode of eczema, and it's something that I dealt with until into my mid 30s, and then it was always on and off kind of thing.
Yeah, I've definitely read a lot of anecdotes of people reporting benefits from it.
Yeah.
I'm glad, though, that you did point out, though, that you're not entirely biased, because you say sometimes it is the calorie deficit, and that is one thing that a lot is, I think, the common person who doesn't maybe delve into the research thinks, oh, well, I lost 30 pounds on keto, it's the miracle diet, and really they probably just didn't have as much of an appetite. Another benefit. I mean, a lot of people just don't want to eat as much food on it.
Yeah.
So what benefits do you find compared to a calorie deficit inherent in the ketogenic diet? We kind of already touched on the decrease in inflammation. Are there mechanisms that you think it can increase fat loss aside from just the calorie deficit, or is that one something that really just comes from the maybe lack of appetite?
Yeah, I think it's primarily due to the lack of appetite, but it does. No metabolic physiologist will argue that your fat metabolism is ramped up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you have a lot of fatty acid oxidation pathways. When we look at the metabolomics, from the liver to the skeletal muscle to all the different tissues, we see these, changes associated with a shift away from glycolysis and a shift towards fatty acid oxidation, in the actual tissue. So I just attended the American Epilepsy Society meeting, and they had data from, I think it was like 30 patients, and showing that the anti-seizure effects of the diet was really associated with a shift from glycolytic pathways being activated to fatty acid and ketone oxidation pathways being activated. And you could there was like a pretty tight correlation, the therapeutic benefits of the diet as it pertains to the brain, brain energy metabolism and anti-seizure effect really was associated with shifting your metabolic physiology. And we approach this from, even the cancer perspective too, because cancer, if you shift your metabolism, your metabolic physiology to be, fat and ketone, burning, that actually targets what we call the Warburg effect, right? So the Warburg effect is one of the kind of the hallmarks of cancer, deranged energy metabolism. And being in that metabolic physiological state actually targets all the hallmarks of cancer, not just energy metabolism. It knocks down angiogenesis, it knocks down proliferation, it knocks down invasiveness of the cancer, metastasis of the cancer. So metabolism is very complex. And when you shift your body's metabolism, and we are very metabolically flexible, that causes pretty profound consequences to your immune system, to the neuropharmacology of your brain, to brain blood flow. People's eyesight is better. Beta hydroxybutyrate, when you're on the diet, the adenosine goes up and adenosine receptor signaling goes up. And that has a vasodilation effect, and that can, increase blood flow to organs that may otherwise be ischemic or hypoxic. So sometimes people's eyes, these have been documented, these kinds of things. So it's really hard to predict, and it's really hard to sum up all the benefits. But in regards to fat loss specifically, I know I went around in a big circle, but I know with fat loss specifically, I do think there are advantages above and beyond just the ease of it. The ease the diet allows for in regards to appetite suppression and calorie deficit. There's a lot more going on there.
You just mentioned there about, you said the ketogenic diet increases adenosine levels, right?
Yeah, we found levels that were like 4 or 5 times higher in our rats. And adenosine's a neuroprotective substance. We associate it with coffee because adenosine's, caffeine's an adenosine receptor antagonist.
That's what I was going to
Yeah.
People say they have higher energy on a ketogenic diet. I would think higher adenosine would have caused more fatigue,
Yeah, but I think, there's compensatory mechanisms, and I don't know kind of what it means from the standpoint of adenosine has a stabilizing effect on your brain, by opening opening potassium channels that hyperpolarize the membrane potential. So as a brain stabilizing effect, but yeah, not a very, and a vasodilation effect too, right? So you're getting more blood flow. And some people it can be pretty robust. I know there's one study showing a 30% increase, in brain blood flow if you spike ketone levels up like 1 to 2 millimolar or something like that. Wow. So there's a lot of changes happening, and it's hard to like really pin down any one contributing factor. I think it's many different things working in synchrony, or synergy, I should say.
Interesting. Something that I noticed, so generally when people think of lower carbs, they think of thyroid hormone going down a bit. The first couple times I did ketogenic diet, I never noticed any real change or from what I could tell in my metabolism, but as I mentioned, those were cyclical. But this time doing a full-on ketogenic diet, I noticed, so I started at about 190 pounds, and I kept calories the same, which was definitely tough in the beginning because I was only eating a few foods and all that oil and everything was tough. But I dropped down to about 186, so I assume mostly water weight. But over the next like 8 weeks, I slowly went up to about 193, and I kept calories like meticulously tracked, and I kept them the same. And I have no idea why that was. I've never experienced anything like that. But it literally was like this drop, and then I just slowly kept going up. Have you seen anything like that, and why that would be?
I don't really track my weight all that much. I know that I'm about 218 right now, and that's kind of light for me, but I'm not trying to eat. Or what I do track, though, more than anything else is strength. So if strength is going down, then I add calories. If my strength, is where I want it to be. So I don't track nowadays. I don't track my weight, my body weight, all that much, but I do track my strength. And I can tell you when I'm on a ketogenic diet and my calories are low or my protein's too low, if I add it back in and simultaneously, get to the gym more, I put on muscle relatively fast.
Yeah.
And I see no reason why people can't put on muscle, with a ketogenic diet if they're in a big hurry to do it, which I don't necessarily think is a good thing. I think the slow, addition of muscle over time. I think, a lot of people like to bulk and just throw in tons of carbs, and I think that's probably that's the kinds of things that actually cause health issues for me in the past. Like chronic inflammation, or I'd have a flare up of my eczema. I don't know. I would just, it would evoke a cold. My immune system would get hit, things like that. Now, I mean, I haven't had a cold, man. I don't, in at least 5 years, I haven't had a cold. It's like,
Wow.
I think my body and my system tends to run really well with the way I'm eating right now. Like I said, it's not strict, but it's very liberal, diet. But
how many calories are you eating now to maintain 218?
I would say on average, some days it's definitely less than 2,000, but
Wow.
other days I'm working here on the farm. I'm in my truck now. That's just to stay quiet because it's kind of noisy around the farm. But today I'm cutting up logs with the chainsaw, like I'm deadlifting all day, throwing things,
Right.
on the trailer and stuff. And I'm working hard. So I think by the end of the day, I might have close to 4,000 calories in today. But
Okay.
it varies. I mean, it could be as low as 1,500 some days when I'm traveling to over 4,000 if a day I'm really working hard on the farm. Actually, I have not been to the gym in almost a month, but I've been doing a lot of heavy work outside. So I'm kind of itching to get back to the gym to test my strength. I have been doing chin-ups and stuff, and I can still do like 30 chin-ups and push-ups, stuff like that. So my body weight strength has maintained, but my gym strength probably went down just because I haven't been in the gym for a long time.
Yeah, it's interesting. And one thing you had talked about, I mean, a lot of people right now are doing ketogenic diets with intermittent fasting. That seems to be like the new combo people like to do. I think it was you who mentioned that intermittent fasting and maybe ketosis in general affects autophagy pathways related to like mTOR and anti-kinase, things like that. Is that?
Yeah, it can. Rhonda Patrick talks about that a lot, I think. Anytime you get an energy or calorie deficit, you could stimulate autophagy, right?
Yeah.
I do think these things may be sensitive to relative changes. So if you are doing a ketogenic diet, we know that that's a mild, calorie restriction mimetic, even with, normal calories because insulin goes down in various pathways. So in theory, and measuring autophagy is kind of difficult, but in theory, if you do a ketogenic diet and combine that with time-restricted eating, aka intermittent fasting, that may give better results in terms of autophagy. I've not measured that, but I'm just saying, like in theory, it makes scientific sense that could further enhance autophagy and maybe some of the benefits you derive from that. But I do think that this is kind of tightly coupled to a calorie deficit.
Yeah. It's interesting to speculate on it. I just think we probably don't have enough research to really say much about it yet.
Yeah, I could tell you that a consistent, protracted calorie deficit as it pertains to like getting in contest shape can wreak havoc with your body, sort of. Can really So I'm kind of a fan of doing more, restricting for a period of time, and then getting a surplus amount of calories and letting the body rebuild and let your body relax, and then hitting it hard, with physical activity, sort of in a fed state but fasted. Like you're fasted, but your body's been fed previously, so
Yeah.
your energy levels are kind of topped off, but you're exercising in a state of relatively low glucose and insulin. And I think you get some recent data too, maybe some better adaptive changes in skeletal muscle when you exercise in that state. Like
Gotcha.
like your body has all the nutrition that it needs from previous days of eating, but you're actually working out in a semi-fasted state.
Mm, gotcha.
The
Yeah.
jury's kind of still out on that. I think some people may argue that, but I think some of the data is leading in that direction.
Okay. Very cool.
Yeah.
So I know you said your calories are all over the place at times. Do you throw in any just like full-on carb cheats? Does that still happen, and you just go back into ketosis?
If I cheat, I don't really do it. I have so many ketogenic foods around the house, like ketogenic chocolate scones, like blueberry pancakes, ice cream, brownies, things like that. So I tend not to. And these foods are now to the point where they taste pretty close to the real thing.
Yeah.
They're just made. So I tend not to like go off the wagon. Sometimes when my wife and I go out to eat, or go to the movies, I'll get popcorn.
Okay.
So that's kind of like my only cheat food that I can think of. And if we're traveling, like, when we're in Naples, like I had the pizza in Naples, or when we're traveling internationally, I will kind of sample the food in those areas.
And you adapt fine to having the carbs in it?
Yeah, what I generally do, if it's like we're in an area where I know I want to eat the customary dinner there, I will like fast throughout the day, and then usually do a lot of walking or whatever when we're traveling, and then eat that, but not overly indulge. It's all about kind of, doing things in moderation. But I never, like, I used to just go completely off the wagon and just, eat a whole pizza and a tub of ice cream and cookies on top of that. And like, I would never do that again. I don't desire to do that again.
Yeah. Those foods that you mentioned, like a lot of like the cookies and scones and things,
Yeah.
like Quest bars are technically ketogenic,
Yeah.
because 4 grams of net carbs. So I was looking at it, and it says it's like 20 some grams of carbs, but I think almost all of that is like sugar alcohols or something.
Yeah.
Is that fine to you in a ketogenic diet, as long as the net carbs are?
Yeah, I mean, I've eaten 1 or 2 Quest bars a day and stayed in pretty strong ketosis, especially if I'm pretty active. They're not ketogenic macros per se, but they changed the type of fiber from IMO to a corn fiber, and that fiber is essentially non-glycemic. It's very low insulin response, so you could generally, if you're following pretty strict keto macros, you could have a bar or two a day, and my wife loves them, and she actually eats a lot of them, and I tend to use them if I travel a lot too.
Yeah.
I throw them in my bag for just like emergency food if I need something. But yeah, I think it's low, definitely low carb, but I wouldn't call it a ketogenic food.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
And one thing we touched on earlier was the changes in cholesterol. And so
Yeah.
I know you first did it, you mentioned it spiked, and you had mentioned it had gotten better. I don't know if you know your current values. Are you aware of your current cholesterol values?
Yeah, just got it measured. My HDL is like 90, and my LDL is like about 120 or 110, somewhere
Okay.
around there. So to me, I think that's fine, to have 220 or 210 or something like that total cholesterol.
Yeah.
Triglycerides are pretty low, and CRP is like non-detectable. Insulin's very low. It's within physiological range, but it's just low in that range.
Okay.
So
Mine almost mirrors that entirely, except the LDL. So CRP was like 0.3. Triglycerides were maybe like in the 50s. HDL was in the 80s. But my LDL, I measured it after 6 weeks, and it was like 230 or something.
yeah, I've been that high before. Yeah.
Yeah, my total was like 370. It was pretty up there.
Yeah.
And then the next time, and again, I don't know if this was because I changed the fats or because I was just adapting. It was like 300, and LDL was less. I'd have to look up the exact values, but it was still high. I mean, still very high. My the low density LDL or small LDL, like tripled. Basically, it was very bad by all standard markers. I have to do it again soon because now it's been like probably 16 weeks, so I'm interested to see change. But do you notice that like everybody eventually kind of gets back to normal, or
the first 3 to 6 months, I would say, and it's that long, I could see some really high spikes in that. And then after, I mean, some doctors, keto doctors, even will say, well, it takes about 3 months, but I think only after about 6 months do things really start to normalize. I'm just drawing back on a lot of the clinical data I've seen at clinical conferences and seeing these numbers tracked over time in the kids and adults. So I think it really takes like up to a year really for your body to kind of fully be sort of keto adapted. And then, there's things like adherence and, there's a learning curve to the diet. So it's like, are you really in ketosis? So there's a lot of things, a lot of factors at play. But I think it takes longer than people realize to really, for these things to go back to normal. And we still don't, we really don't know what the elevated LDL means in the context of a high-fat ketogenic diet because it hasn't been studied. We do know what it means in the context of a standard Western diet. It could be atherogenic, but we don't know. It makes sense to me that with a ketogenic diet, you need more LDL to really transport not only the cholesterol, but the triglycerides and the phospholipids and things like that. You need more transporters, and that's part of that transport system. It's a pretty complicated, it's a very complicated topic, and I think that even the people at the top, like Ron Krauss, and I know my friend Peter Attia is on top of this, and they're not fully confident, with giving recommendations or even interpreting blood work on ketogenic diets because the science is still emerging in this area.
Yeah. I actually spoke with a cardiologist recently, and he had definitely controversial opinions on it, but he is all about like higher cholesterol levels. He thinks LDL has a protective effect from like an infection point. It's a carrier, as you said, for triglycerides, and he doesn't see a problem with it at all. And he sent me probably close to 10 studies showing when they looked at like elderly populations, those with higher LDL actually were living longer.
All-cause mortality. I think there's more important things to worry about, really.
Yeah, it is interesting. So we kind of talked about before about if somebody wants to start, you said gradually introduce. Well, I guess gradually increase fats, gradually lower carbs. Anything else that you would say for them, somebody trying to get started, or really just do it and just kind of?
I would say decrease your feeding, like number of feedings throughout the day, and just try to maybe push your breakfast or your first meal off from, if it's 6 a.m. to like, 9 and then to like 10, 11, 12. And then getting the intermittent fasting is something that I didn't really do until like the last 5 years. And I think it really helps people a lot to decrease that, because when you are fasted, it may be a behavioral thing, but I think it's a combination of behavioral control, but also physiological changes that occur during that time restricted window. So I think the combination of those two things really makes adherence better. And it's not going to work for everyone, but I just think the feedback that I get is that you could just take a normal standard diet and start to do the intermittent fasting, and then when you go to a ketogenic diet, it's just easier for people, and vice versa, right? If you do the ketogenic diet, it makes intermittent fasting easier.
Gotcha. Cool. All right. Well, just wrap up with a quick speed round, 3 questions. It could be an answer, one word or one sentence. So, favorite keto food?
Ketogenic ice cream.
Ketogenic ice cream. Okay. Favorite keto supplement?
I'd have to go with Ketogenics and Prove It Keto OS 2.1 because they're both basically the same ingredients. Yeah.
Okay. And what is something that you think we will find out the ketogenic diet is useful for that we don't have enough proof for now to say?
Well, we only have data on animal models for epigenetic changes, but I do think data will emerge that ketone bodies cause changes in methylation of genes that can ultimately result in a gene therapy or an epigenetic therapy, better stated. Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool, man. So, everybody, this is Dom D'Agostino, and I know you have a website. Your interviews are all over YouTube now. So where can people find more of your stuff?
Yeah, ketonutrition.org is kind of like my one-stop shop there. So all the interviews, we have consultants, we have doctors, we have publications, foods, keto supplements are on there. I don't sell any supplements, but the things that we test in the lab are listed on there. So
Okay.
things that I use myself are listed on there.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's where I found the Keto Mojo kit for my ketone levels, which has been very helpful.
Yeah, I think it's helpful. I'm still a little bit on the fence. I also use the Abbott Precision Extra, but Keto Mojo's getting better, and I'm still using it. I
Yeah.
use them both. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks so much for talking.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, David.